working with fiber for me has been a part of my life since I was 5. I started sewing at 5, and for me, sewing in general was kind of a survival activity. I got married very young, and if I had, as young as I got married, finances were always tight, so if I wanted anything new, it had to be made by me, which was just fine with me. I like that. I was one of the founding members of this guild, and then I jumped ship. And in late 1999, we moved to the Southern Ozarks, where for the next 16 years we wound up pretty much caregiving for my parents. And it took me away from my support group, which the Service Design Guild was very good at. Sorry, I'll try to stay in camera here. And I was pretty much out in the middle of nowhere. We were in a small town of 2,000, and the closest fabric store of any quality was over 2 hours away. So I decided early on, fortunately I had a chance to learn about dyeing through the Service Guild, and that was pretty much how I approached things from then on. It was, okay, I'll start with some basic fabric, and most of the quilts you see along here all started as white fabric for me. So there are a few of them that are either commercial or I bought, but for the most part, I started with white and worked from there, and it was just kind of part of the game. And as you will obviously know, they are all made using the bullseye block, which is actually, well over 100 years old. And one of the things that fascinated me about the block in general was the fact that you kind of rob Peter to pay Paul. It's very conservative in use of fabric, because each time you do a layer, you then cut out the layer that becomes the bottom layer, and it becomes the top layer on the next piece. But I scramble them. And it may seem weird to just kind of focus all on one particular thing, but I was really enjoying the constraints of an arbitrary game. That's basically what it came down to. And by not having to have a different pattern or block each time, I could take my attention off that aspect and focus on where my real passion is color. And so then it became a game of how do you put these colors together, and how do you commingle them, and how within this arbitrary structure, how do you turn it in, how can you make it exciting? I'm not doing this style anymore. I kind of ran out of things to say, but I really liked the collection that kind of got put together. And being that they're art quilts, technically art quilts, you're not dealing with a whole lot of rules. I am not a rule follower. I well remember one of our early meetings, and they were talking about trying to put this structure, and I just went, we don't want no stinking rules. You know? And I've kind of been that way all my life. So I know that they have to be there to kind of have the structure, have a cohesive structure, but I'm not a rule follower. I tend to be more of a maverick. In fact, my company name is Rebel Quilter. It has nothing to do with the South.
That's a great show.
It totally has to do with approach and whatever. Anyway, this particular one, this was one of the very first ones I did. Now this is all silk. Silk is my primary medium I work in. this one, I'd started studying the colors that were in the sky after a sunset. And in studying these colors, one of the things that fascinated me was how much green there was after in a sunset. And it was kind of knocked me over. And so as I was dissecting these colors a little bit more, and it was just fascinating. And this particular one is called Nighthawks. I used to live in Austin, Texas, and I used to love watching the Nighthawks flying over the Capitol building at night. And you could hear them calling up there. And this one, so there's not a high contrast here, but I've got all these Nighthawks on here. And these little flies that they're after are actually fly fishing lures that I have taken the hook off of. And then on the back, I did shibori, but I also, and you can't really notice because it's very low contrast, but there's also a Nighthawk that I did in a lino cut that is actually printed on here multiple times. This one's called Terminally Optimistic. In 2014, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And for me, it came out of the blue. There's no history in our family. I always thought that I was fairly supportive of a healthy lifestyle. I didn't think I was doing things to contribute to what would bring on breast cancer. So I wasn't in a mental frame of mind to think of myself as that kind of person, whatever that is. And I wondered how that would affect me, how having cancer would affect me as a person. I thought that it would, I didn't know where to go with it. It was just so bizarre to me. And although I would never recommend it or want anybody to have to go through it, I will say that I'm glad, because it really gave me a chance to stop and look at what was important to me. And what I realized was that fundamentally, I am an optimist, and I've always been one. And even when it showed up a second time, I don't feel discouraged or overwhelmed by it. I'm realizing it's okay, just kind of keep going and do what feels right. So that one's what that was all about. This is the first one, and I'd had quite a hiatus between projects while we were up there. There was taking care of my parents. We also had the insanity of owning a restaurant for a while. So there was a lot of time that I wasn't able to be working in my studio. Prior to that, for 7 years, I was doing art festivals where I was on the road, 15 to 20 shows a year all over the country. And so I would make my quilts and head off to the art festivals and drive back and make more. And I had pretty good production going. I had a lot of fun and I really enjoyed it. I had a wonderful studio that was in downtown Thayer. I had we're talking a rural town here. I rented this place for $225 a month. The rent never went up. I had 1,100 square feet. It used to be, the front part of it used to be a dental office. The back part of it used to be the town's newspaper office. And what used to be their, the dark room became my dye kitchen. And I had an 8-foot wide, 3-foot deep, 6-inch deep sink, because for all the photography, all the photography stuff. Yeah. What a perfect sink! I could put buckets, and I mean, it was just wonderful, and I didn't have to bend over. It was fabulous. But anyway, so unfortunately that got left behind. But it was a wonderful, wonderful place to work, and I enjoyed it immensely. This piece here It's called Sky West. We had a wonderful opportunity to take a trip out west, and we drove, and it was our first time really to get out in there. And one of the things that really struck me was with the super low humidity, how crisp what you're seeing is. When you're seeing rocks and hillsides, you're seeing individual colors, and they really stand out, and the colors are very rich. And so I was playing with color. This particular piece wound up getting selected to be the poster image for the Missouri Art Council's Art Awards. Now, it didn't get an award other than the fact that it was on the poster, which for me was just fun. I'm trying to see if I can. Oh, I dyed a bunch. This was all, I dyed the backs as well and played around with that. Most of this is hand dyed. I love throwing metallics in there. I think there's a little bit of magpie in my blood. And so I love a little bit of a spark of unexpected glitter and glitz. And that's what that is. This one is spots, dots, speckles, and freckles. And it was one of the first times I'd actually used sashing. And most of the quilting on this piece is either in the sashing or in the black parts. The rest of it's not. But let me show you how I did on the back. See if you can see it. Well, you really can't see it. Anyway, there's kind of a center point here, and all of the quilting kind of flows out from there. And I did paint the back. And that was just splatter paint. But that was kind of a fun twist for me. And then I thought, well, okay, working with the spots and et cetera, what about stripes? Y'all remember, what was it, Yike Stripes, Beach Moscato, the gum? Y'all remember that gum?
Oh, yeah.
Well, this one's called Yike Stripes. And just, again, trying to play with with adding sashing in and adding in, I forget what the little thing in the middle is called, but anyway, I'll think about it later. This one though, I used, to paint this back, I used freezer paper as a stencil, cut the big circle with freezer paper if you've never used it as a stencil. With an iron, the shiny side will become, it'll kind of melt a tiny bit, and it'll be it'll temporarily adhere, and you can actually peel it off and reuse it and move it around several times. And so, I've used both the inside and the outside of the circle. So here, I actually used the outside that I cut out, and then I used paint sticks to go around these edges in here. And this one was using, this one I used the inside and then went around. And then this is just a variegated black and white thread that was in my bobbin. Yeah. I love just the effect it created. It was kind of fun. If anybody has any questions on any of these as it comes up, I'm okay with being asked at the time. This was called What If. I had a very dear friend of mine. What an amazing woman. She's died the last couple of years. She was using a Segway as her transport as a disabled person. And she was 80 years old. And she would take on anybody. She wanted to go to botanical gardens. They're like, you can't use that in here. It's like, yes, I can. But her, Disability Act information, handed out brochures on it all the time. But she was a lifelong teacher. And I was part of a group up there in the Ozarks called Uncommon Threads. And we met monthly and most people drove a couple hours to get there. It was kind of a central point. Anyway, Lily was always saying, what if?
Forgive my English, but what is a Segway?
I'm sorry, it's one of those electric scooter. You stand on it, it's got the wheels here and you got a handle here, and it can move. And she, you know, sometimes you see them renting them out and stuff.
Are they electrically operated?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Electrically.
Yeah, and she just, she was everywhere. She had me in the library here with it, you know. And, but anyway, she was an amazing, amazing woman. But she loved to say, what if? What if you did this? What if you tried this? So this, for me, was a big experiment. I think I dyed most of the solid colors. Again, this is a combination, some silk, some cotton. But in this case, before I started, like whenever I do these, I start off with an, I'm sorry I didn't bring samples, but an 8-inch square. And so before I did anything else, I had the 8-inch square, and on some of them, I came in and printed and just made a big X. Painted a big X on it. And then some of them, I did, when I got around, the next step is I have a 6-inch circle. Well, so for half of them, I stitched across in a big X on the circles as couching them down. And so that's kind of the starting point. And a lot of times people think, oh God, you're dealing with arcs and stuff, and you know, those are kind of a booger to handle if you're trying to deal with a pattern called Drunkard's Path, which oftentimes is similar to this. But that particular method, you wind up with things going, they're hard to deal with because you're dealing with an arc that can get wonky and stuff. I like easy. You start with a square, you put a whole circle down on top of it. Your grain is aligned so you're not getting any distortion. When you start cutting things out, it stays aligned. So again, you're not getting things distorted. And it doesn't become an arc until I've got all the layers, and then I cut it in quarters, which cuts out all the weird opportunities for distortion. But anyway, this was just kind of fun because it threw in some processes that I hadn't dealt with before. Anyway, let's see. Oh, and on the back here, this is that same block I used to print the corners, corner to corner, and then these are silk screens. This piece is called Celebrating Normalcy. And it comes from a period where, and I don't know if you've ever had a family health crisis where life just kind of goes totally bizarre while the emergencies are being handled. And you know, just the idea of being able to feed the dog that tiny bit of normalcy is so restorative and it just feels so good. So that's kind of what this is all about, is coming back after a period of crazy family health crisis. Not my own, fortunately, but I wanted calming, I wanted soothing. And this is actually an adaptation, it's inspired by another artist's work. Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed, I can't think of the name. Maybe I wrote it down. Anyway, this, it's kind of hard to see because it's very abstract, but this is actually a landscape. And there's a horizon, and there's a moonrise over water, and this is the reflection on the water. And it's from a different perspective. Like most of the time, if people get excited about a sunset, It's the sunset they're getting excited about. I happen to also enjoy looking at the opposite horizon and seeing what's going on with the colors in the sky over there. And this is actually, because it's a moonrise, it's opposite this sunset. And so what you're getting is the reflection, the afterglow, you know, after the sun's gone down and the moon's coming up. And I like doing things backwards like that. Oh, and on the back of this one, these are all, I did this silk screen. It's all these things that are wonderfully normal, like watering the plants, emptying the dishwasher, you know, making a cup of coffee, doing my taxes, you know, stuff that's normal. They're not necessarily things you love doing, but they help establish normalcy. And so that was, how can normal be so inspiring, you know? I get kind of crazy. And then my last piece. This puppy took 5 months working on it every day. And again, I started with white fabric. That's fast. It's all silk, several different silks. There are, let's see, the inspiration behind this was I was listening to a song and he talked about in being in the slipstream. And I just thought, you know, what would it be like to be caught in the slipstream, in that turbulence? You know, you're kind of being buffeted around, or you're like even in white water or something, you know, you're just getting bounced around. So this is called slipstream adventure. And I envisioned it actually being used in, say, an airport, where you've got the glass walls between things, because the backside has a story of its own going on. And so I designed it with being visible. It becomes the glue for a foil. So these were all different foils, and this was actually the bobbin thread, because I actually stitched it from this side. And so this was in the bobbin, because it's a fat thread. It doesn't really fit through your needle. So that's what all of those were. And then just a whole lot of stitching, a whole lot of dyeing. and it was just kind of fun trying to get this concept of moving from one piece to another. And I don't know, and the coloration. I working with the red to the purple through the brown. I don't know, I just thought it was kind of a cool color. And not something you see every day. So that's pretty much it. You're welcome to look at the backs of them. Each one, the panel, the colors get a little darker as they go by. But I'm perfectly okay with you guys touching any of these. So I just want to say, first of all, thank you for being here. It means so much to me. And being a part of this group is it's a wonderful thing. You don't necessarily immediately establish lifelong friendships, but you're with people that are kind of your own tribe. If you've got a little kind of a kooky viewpoint on life and you like to do weird things that don't follow directions, we are your team. We're your tribe, your troop, and we have a really good time. But as the other nice thing is, we have developed really lifetime long, very deep relationships. I don't think we're cliquish. I think we're welcoming and take people at any level, and basically, if we can inspire your creativity, to me, creativity is my creative being. To me, is the most important element of who I am. And the joy I get in being creative in one way or another, and the opportunity to share that with others and encourage and watch what can happen. What happens as an individual when you spark that, and I love to do that. Did you have a question?
Yes, what
Good.
happens to these beautiful works of art after you've exhibited them in the library?
They have a very sad closet they live in. Actually, I like finding places to exhibit, and whenever I can, you know, I used to exhibit a whole lot more than I do now. And when I can, there's lots of places to do solo exhibitions within, if you take the time to research it. Like lots of corporations, lots of doctors' offices, lots of city offices and government offices. If you take the time to research it, there's plenty of opportunity.
They should be seen, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes.
Yes. I'm sorry?
What kind of silk do you use for your quilts?
Well, this one's actually a combination. This one has a lot of silk noil, which is raw silk. It also has a lot, well, there's some satins. The primaries, one of the basic silks I use is actually 50% cotton and 50% silk. I bonded about 10 years ago from China, and I got like 150 yards at the time. I'm down to about 20.
Wow.
And it was probably 4 times as expensive now as it was then. Because Radiance, which is available, I think retail on that one is $18 to $19 a yard.
And they don't make it anymore?
Yeah. Huh?
They don't make it anymore.
They've recently